Hello everybody and welcome to your History Subject Taster Evening Lecture webinar. We are really pleased that you could join us and hope you are looking forward to the brilliant content of our academics and academic team that we've put together for you today. My name's Sobia Freedy and I work in the UK recruitment team and I'll be chairing the event today. Melanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Melanie Vashner. I am an associate lecturer in the History Department of the History, Philosophy and Culture School. I'm also the widening participation coordinator for the History, Philosophy and Culture School. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Melanie. Clara, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Clara and I'm studying a Masters of History at Brookes at the moment, but I also did my undergraduate degree in history at Brookes, which I graduated from last June. I really enjoyed my time at the uni, which is why I decided to stay on for a Masters. And I'm here to help answer any questions that you may have about the university. I was in your shoes not too long ago, so please feel free to ask anything you'd like to know about applying to the university.
Great, thanks Clara. Over to you, Melanie.
Excellent. So this particular lecture is adapted from material that is usually available at the foundations level course in humanities, which is a history of art, history of medicine, sort of conglomerative course, which is called Being Human, Love, Sex and Death. This same material is also done at the second level in Genders, Sexualities and the Bodies. And it's done in the first level whenever I teach on specific skills courses, because some of the things I talk about are just fun examples that are always useful when you're talking about the types of study that the history of art covers, the types of study that the history program covers. And really the goal is to be the seekers of truth, because we always try not to say that this is how it is, but that what do you think about this bit of information, these sources, this kind of study. So keeping that in mind as we go through the session will be useful. Always in the back of your mind, think about, well, which one would I have wanted? Where were these people like me? So I'm going to turn on sharing my screen here. Hopefully it will be useful to see. I'm going to look at what you guys can see to be sure it's all going well. It's not going well. There we go, now it is. All right, so this is the session. I'm going to click off and watch. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We will get to them at the Q&A session at the end. So, love and marriage. These are two of the most primary events, really, of a person, a human, an individual. Speaking as an unmarried woman that currently doesn't have any really plans on being married, it is always daunting when you read some of the history books on this subject to have that be stated, that marriage is the key building block of a life. But I think there are some things to cover in those types of things we do to demonstrate one's love, things to do that we demonstrate our commitments to one another that help us be human and really help us understand what it is to have lived in a time that is so different from our own. So today, we're covering some quite traditional time periods in the history curriculum, which is the pre-modern period. So the pre-modern would refer to post-classical, which is just at the end of Rome, the Renaissance, which is the 1400s up through to the 1700s, so that's the 15th, the 18th centuries, and then the early modern period, which takes us in through 17th century as well. So they all kind of interchange and are a bit overlapping of one another. So the post-classical era, just to give you some broad spectrum on this, it is the classical empires have fallen, so that is Rome, that's Persia, that is the Ming dynasty of China, the great boat builders have fallen. The Islamic world is in ascendancy, so they're doing quite well. They're building new things, exploring new territory, and quite significant portions of economics and math and how trade empires were built are done in the Islamic world in this post-classical era. When you draw and you paint, you're usually drawing and painting religious things. You're drawing and painting the Virgin Mary, Christianity, everything but Muhammad, because of course you can't depict Muhammad. So it's quite religious in subject matter. Though the high art of the period is focused on religion, the what we would call low art is focused more on everyday life. So you see a lot of people, a lot of individuals having their lives in those paintings, and it's usually in books. In the corners of the margins, they have their kids playing with puppies, for example. So here's just big dates in the chat. I do think our intrepid tech guy has put a link to the slides, so you guys can see these links and follow along. I just entered some post-classical dates here that'll help us kind of put things into perspective. The Crusades, the Great Search for the Holy Land by Richard the Lionheart, the signing of the Magna Carta, the very first Declaration of Human Rights, Marco Polo going to China, the richest man that ever lived, Stale, who used to own the roads in Timbuktu, Mansa Musa. So this is all these big names that lived in this time. And then from those big names, that big history that we know, that we've seen, that we live with in our TV and in our movies, there's also these other people that have some really interesting personal lives. And this is the social history rather than the political history of what some call old dead white dudes. Social history tries to get at the people who lived, the lived experience of their existence. And they have some very interesting things, like Matilda of Tuscany asking for her own spouse rather than waiting for a man to come and ask for her marriage. She actually sent a letter to the Guelph the Fifth there of Bavaria, and he was considered the hot guy of Bavaria. And basically, she just said, come over here and marry me, it'll be fine. And he said yes, and he was about 18 and she was about 40. So, I mean, you really can respect that in a lot of ways, is that she was trying to insert herself into this role that's not traditionally a female or feminine role. So she recognizes in this quote that it's not, that it's this, nor does it matter if a man or a woman makes the first move in love, as long as it involves an indissoluble marriage. So the love letters of the time, as this is one, are quite famously indicative of a much more diverse type than we would previously have understood. So it's not just women sitting in towers with their hair hanging out the window, waiting for a man to come save them. Definitely, definitely not. So Renaissance period. So this is when we go from the Dark Ages into the light of rebirth, is another periodization of this time. There is an assumption that the Renaissance period, an assumption in the traditional literature on this subject, that there was a long-term trend towards repression, that you are not supposed to express anything but courtly love, that high love that had nothing to do with actually touching of bodies or sleeping with each other or being with each other. It was about this higher love. I think there's a song like that. There's this kind of attitude in the traditional, quote, literature, which is the 40s, the 50s of the 1900s, this 1940s, 1950s, that assumes so much based on the Victorian period that before that it must have also been just as repressive. Well, the Victorian period wasn't very repressive in real life, and neither was the Renaissance period. Yes, there is this long-term trend towards making the sexual and love relationships between individuals be quite a private experience, and there's much less public bathing. There's much less of shared accommodation amongst various age groups, so you don't have the babies up to the great-grandmothers in the same room anymore. There's much more space, but that is a change in how the body interacts with the space rather than how the presumptions of the body are imposed upon one. So what that means is that you no longer live in a bedroom with all of your family, so you do feel a bit more private about your body and how your going to court your lover and how you're going to be with your lover. Since you're no longer in the same actual environment, the space is different. So that takes us towards how you then express that kind of private love, the kind of private experience of love, which is different from before, because you have poets at the time, instead of shouting it from the rooftops, it is much more of a sending a private missive, sending a private communication and going somewhere private to speak on one's love. And so this is John Donne, quite famous poet in the 17th century, talking about how saying this poetry out loud and getting it published actually is sort of worse, because yes, he was, the woman says no, and he wrote this poem about how he felt two fools because she said no, I loved her, she said no, but I'm also a fool because I published it rather than making it private. The Triple Fool is the poem, if you have interest in that. A bit further into periodization here, so this is taking us through to the 17th century. So this is the advent of the Bible, fall of Constantinople. We have the discovery, quotes, by white people of America. Definitely hard to discover a country, a place that's already owned by lots of people, but it is traditionally called the discovery of America. Much better to call such a period the period of discovery. So instead of saying that you discovered something, you went and sought things, is that type of discovery. So some interesting periodization here in terms of the treatises on madness, again being the private going into the public. Sorry, I have moved something in front of my screen that is covering up my screen. Just need to hide that. Apologies. Just give you a second to read through some of these. Some of them quite familiar. The Earth revolving around the sun rather than the other way around. So again, back from big things to small things. So all of these lovely big things that we've covered, Isaac Newton, laws of gravity, and science overcoming religious understanding in some ways and reinforcing it in others, comes down to just these two people, these two young people that get married, have children, start the family, that building block of society. How do these people live in such a world and retain their humanity? Where are they as humans? How do we know? What do we do? Well, one way to do that is through understanding how they built up their love for one another, the emotions that go into it, the emotional language, and how they express such. So the image to the right here is of Lady Love, Minnie. She's shooting an arrow right into his heart. And it is a female and a male in this picture. And the only way in this medieval period where you could tell in imagery the difference between a male and a female figure is by the clothes they are wearing. Because as you can tell, they really have the same shaped face, the same shaped eyes, the same hair, the same kind of lithe, gentle figure. The lines of the dress, the lines of his cloak are very, very similar. And it's also true in the medieval period that this was not just how they depicted male and female in art, this was how it was actually in real life shown. This is, you depicted your femininity by outward expression, by your clothes, by your hair, by what you carry, your accoutrement. Males would depict the same, their masculinity, by their accoutrement, their sword at their hip, the colors in their livery. Because if you would bear with me, I'm going to flip back to the bridal couple. That is the livery he is wearing. So this is a quite wealthy couple. So they have the same shaped face, the same shaped eyes, the same lithe, graceful limbs, figures. It is just the outfits that are different. That's how you could tell the difference between male and female. So the idealized body that love that you speak of talks about that the lithesome air of your graceful body. And you can get right down to the end and go, okay, well, is this a letter from a woman to a man or a man to a woman? Because it's really the same. So these presumed assumptions that we have coming at it from a modern audience, that you look at the art, you look at the poetry, and you can really tell who's the man and who's the woman. We can't base our assumptions on that. We have to read about them in the existence they lived and how they understood how they fit together as a partnership, as a couple. So that's the first step in understanding the history of love. The history of marriage is not going in with your conceptions and your knowledge and understanding of what that means today. You have to go see what they said about themselves. That's a crucial thing with history, is not going in with modern eyes and judging based on our modern eyes. It's always about seeking their truth. So let's talk a bit about emotions and emotional language. So this is R.S. White in a edited work on modern emotions. And it's this past is a foreign country. And that's a common quote that we have a lot, that there's a lot of people that say the past is full of these other people, these people that did things so much differently, we could never understand them. They are alien to us. And I think that takes the understanding them in their own context a bit too far, really, because they are still us. They're still humans. They still interact with their lives, their friends, their family, their mothers, their fathers in the same way we do, with the same emotions we do. It's the expression of that that is different. So one way is to get at what they commemorated their lives with. And one of those things is poetry. And when you read through poetry, it is very important to read it with all the punctuation and spacing in mind, because that was how it was meant to be said. It was meant to be performed. And in that, right at that turn of the 17th century into the 18th century, we start to get that poetry is womanish. That it's the fop writes a poem for his lady love, a real man wouldn't. But the judgment on that is quite increasingly a modern kind of judgment rather than a judgment for the 1400s, 1500s. So let's read one. This is going back to John Donne. I am two fools, I know, for loving and for saying so, in whining poetry. But where's that wise man? That would not be I. She would not deny. To love and grief tribute of verse belongs, but not of such as pleases 'tis read. Both are increased by such songs, for both their triumphs so are published. And I, which was two fools, do so grow three, who are a little wise, the best fools be. So it's following the lines, following the commas, the periods, the full stops. And this is how it is written on the page for Donne. It's written with these progressive lines down. So it's meant to be paused, meant to be breathed and lived. And I think that lends something to when you go through a poem, it lends something to read it out loud. So therefore, think about this. How far has emotional language changed? I include this meme because it's my favorite meme in the whole wide world. I usually send it on a chat to people whenever they give me good positive feedback. So it's not this is the beauty of your lithesome glance. It's how many times have we said I love you and meant it is something to think about. Because I love you is something so important and so intense at this time. You wouldn't say it to just anyone, and I tend to say it about cheesecake. So also think about these other words that have changed, like amazed, astounded, bewildered, overwhelmed, bewitched. Well, there's a song like that too. Bewitched, bothered, and bewildered. You're bewitched, you're mesmerized. awesome. You're filled with awe and speechless. So think about that kind of language. And then how you would then express it. Well, there's love tokens, and it was one of the love tokens at the time was hair, because, you know, it's ready to hand. You have it right there on your head. It's also a personal thing. It's something that's touched on you, that's on your body, and you're giving that piece of your body, your soul, because the body is housed in the soul in the 15th century, to someone to hold forever as part of you. Very intense, very specific, very emotional. Cutting off a piece of yourself, keep it in a locket. Think about it like that. It's very cannibalistic, if you think. And it was very common to wear this hair. It is called the love lock. And he's actually depicted with the love lock right there by his ear. This is from the Royal Collection Trust. And it's William Lord Compton, perhaps the Earl of Northampton. And he's wearing that hair up here in the corner, right underneath his left ear. So the love lock is this fashionable way to display this connection to a loved one that you're taking. There was also coinage. So this is sort of, whenever I look at these love tokens, that's why they're called love tokens, because they actually used to be little tokens, these little copper pieces. And it was, copper's quite soft, so you could stamp it with, and etch it with things. Gold's quite soft as well, but of course copper is cheaper. So this metal is quite malleable. And so it's etched with the initials of, actually in this one, his whole family. And then the symbols of the family. So there's some swallows and some flowers on the backside. And this token was actually sent with someone going to prison to hold and remember. So that's why we call them love tokens. They used to actually be a token, an actual object, a thing. And then there's love letters, the words. So one of the more famous ones for America is this Anne Bradstreet. This loving husband, to my loving husband from this dear wife. And it's quite sexy language. If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. More prized than all the whole mines of gold, or all the riches the east doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench. She's thirsty, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. So it's not just that love is something that's going to bind a marriage together. It's also something that's going to be very intrinsically of value, is what she's saying here in this poem. The 17th century Puritan lass, you know, you have her in her wimple and her dress, and she's got the keys of the household at her side. Definitely portrayed always, Anne Bradstreet is as the epitome of a good home body, a good wife. And then she writes these quite sexy, really, poems to her husband. You know, that it's, my love, myself, my body is worth more than mines of gold and all the spices in the East. It's quite beautiful, really, that love at that time, when it's expressed personally, privately, between people, between just us, really, that has value as well. So it's not just a performative thing. You do it once, you get married, there's a big show, and it's over. It's also something that is continually re-upped. So the difference, therefore, is these two kinds of love. You have this courtly love, which is quite performative, you know, standing up and saying your poem to your lady love, and you never expected to actually touch her, marry her, or actually maybe even speak to her. If you were a knight and she was a lady, you would never even be in the same room, really. And then romantic love. And this example, the poem to the right there is an example of a courtly love poem, which is, "Oh God of love, what pain this loving is. I pine in my heart." It's all very bombastic, performative. And to the left there, you have this, it's tin, actually. It's glazed earthenware. And it's inscribed with Dulce est mare, which is sweet as love. And it's just, is it a performative to have such a plate on display? Perhaps. So that's the kind of things to think about when you look at art from the period, when you look at poetry from the period. Try to see what the expression is. Is it a personal expression, a public one? Is it meant to be read by the person only, or is it meant to be read out loud in public for everyone to see? Because one of the things for romantic love is that it's requited. Courtly love was always, the most perfect courtly love was about the love sickness, was about the pining, the hurt. That was the purest of the loves. Which is why if you go back in your mind to the big list of dates, one of them is when madness was first recognized. It's a part of this psychology, this psychosis of love sickness was very much a part of that. So if you have these loves, you have a question then. If some of this love that's being expressed in the poetry and the art of the period is courtly, performative, perhaps not true love, burning in your soul, well then what does therefore mean marriage? So marriage then is not necessarily between two people who fall in love and run off to get married. It's also a bit performative. There's a contract. It's about the society that's also being built. So this is the Arnolfi portrait by Jan van Eyck, and it was commissioned by this married couple, and it's unique amongst such imagery because in addition to displaying the wealth, I mean the fur-lined cape, the puppy, which is useless because it's a teeny tiny puppy and therefore not a working dog, it's just decorative. You have the long draped gorgeous dress that she's actually picking up and holding in front of her, a very common display. So she's not pregnant, she's holding up all that dress in front of her to better display how much dress she has. There's also some tangerines in the background and some peaches on the windowsill. Those are exotic fruits. So it's designed to display this wealth, yes, but it's also a painting of them in their bedroom. So it's also displaying their private life, their private existence, and that they're not just a wedded couple in public, they're also one in private, is what is implied by this painting. And it was done deliberately by the Arnolfi to separate themselves from these other arranged marriages amongst their kin. So let's talk about that. There's two different versions of marriage contracts in this pre-modern period. And it does depend on whether it's a patriarchal society or a matriarchal society. So I'll give you an example of each. In the patriarchal societies, this is Europe. You have the families living under one shared roof. However, the family, the doma, the family itself, is also not just the blood relatives, it's the servants, it's the people you pay, it's the people that are in training to your father, for example, if it's a woodworking is very common at that time where you had these apprentices to the woodworkers, likewise for silversmiths if you're over in Italy, glass blowers, the further south you go. So this family, this group is defined by who lives in the house. It's that shared doma, that shared family. And so the structure, therefore, is the one we're perhaps quite familiar with, which is the rule of the father, the pater familias in Latin, which then gets to decide everything else about the structure of that family. So you get to determine who marries who inherits, where their daughters are going to be disposed of, what the children are going to do, what kind of servants are involved in the house. And this is meant to be, in a patriarchal society, in the pre-modern period, it's meant to be that whole state, the country that you live in small, little microcosm. So the state, the society, is also governed by a male figure who gets to decide who's in charge, what they do, who marries who. and it's very much a top-down understanding. So therefore, the marriage is important as a building block for the society, for the state. So it's not just something to be entered into lightly. This is connections between countries, if you think of it that way. So the father, the King of France, can't just let his daughter marry anybody, because it's going to bring them under that shared roof. So it's not just about preserving power, it's about preserving peace in some ways, and about understanding who's a part of us, a part of the family. So there's layers to this. It's like an onion. In the matriarchal societies, you see this quite a lot in the Americas, where you have much more of a diverse, fluid relationship. And it's because rather than having the household as cohabitation, yes, that's still true, it's about the wider interactions between those households. And it's really the difference in current historiography between the two societies boils down to it was the mother who was the progenitor of the family. That it's the mother who was birthed the child, which I think makes a lot of sense, really. Because it's my child, I've given birth. You know that is her. You know that child belongs to that mother. You were there. You saw it happen. In a patriarchal society, it's a little bit more difficult to prove that. You have to control the bloodline quite specifically. So in the Americas, you see a bit more fluidity. So you have a bit more of, little bit more of sex before marriage, because the mother can be proven. You have polyandry as well, because in the Comanche Plains and some South American tribes, it's very much warrior culture. So you might have men shortage. You might not have a lot of men. So instead of having one woman to one man, you might have one woman, several men, to make sure that the bloodlines could be progressed, that the bloodlines could continue. So since the mother is so much more important in a matriarchal society, instead of the woman going to live with the man, you have the man going to live with the woman. And if the guy did not get along with his mother-in-law, not gonna happen, the marriage. Just not gonna happen. You also see much more gender fluidity. And you see the gender fluidity in Europe as well. And it's much more prevalent in the 1400s and the 14th century, previous centuries, because the female, the feminine, versus the male and the masculine is done through your outward appearance, your clothes. So you put on the clothes of the other gender and you present as that gender. You are that gender in the medieval period, even in Europe. So this hard and fast division between this gender binary is not so hard and fast for every nation, not every country, not every part of the world. So going in to assume that is something that we should not do. But in either case, it's the household, that building block, that's crucial. And this painting is called The Dissolute Household by Jan Steen, 17th century. And it's trying to show what we shouldn't do. You shouldn't have broken glass on the floor and the cat getting at the ham. The mother being drunk here, also showing way too much bosom. The kids just running around talking to strangers. It's supposed to be something you build together. So if we go back to that patriarchal society, it's destabilizing divorce. It's destabilizing not following the rules, because it will lead to a breakdown of a marriage, which could lead to a breakdown of a household. And then how do you divide a household? So it's not so cut and dried. So when you go through into the 17th century, since the household is that crucial element that's going to bring about good society, bring about peace between what had been really strongly rivaling baronetcies and dukedoms and kingdoms and tribes, you had stability finally, so you want to keep that well governed. And that's where you see this trend in Europe towards what we now call repression, but wasn't really repressive. It was just privacy. The regulation of what you do in public by the state, by the church. Yes, you shouldn't do this in public. You will be ostracized, which will break down your ability to interact with society in a good way. But it didn't mean don't do it. It just means keep it to yourself, keep it private. It's when you express that dissolution, that's where you have issues. So if the crucial point is marriage and a good marriage, how do we solidify that? How do we research whether or not the marriage was, for example, for love or for a strong, stable society? Well, it's quite difficult, really. To go back to Matilda of Tuscany, it's not just something that a man would impose upon a woman. It's something that a woman would want as well, consent of both. So there's not just the patriarchal, you must marry. There's much more diversity than that. Likewise, there's this assumption that beauty on the outside indicates beauty on the inside. And it is that body and the soul being one. That you aren't a soul living in a body in 16th century Florence. You are a body that is a soul. So you look for perfection. And this does filter down, not just into the beauty with the beautiful character, beautiful body, but if you had imperfections, you also had some issues. So the physical deformity being indicative of bad character is something that's assumed at this time. So in practice, you have some serious considerations. It's not necessarily about the content of your character. You prove your innocence by your outward appearance, your outward expressions of how you interact in society. So if you look right, act right, do right, you are right, is the assumption for really Southern and Western Europe in this the 17th century period. But it's not just about making sure the woman stays at home and the man gets to do outside work. It's a partnership. You work together and you are together. That's when you see this partnership become really crucial to the marriage contract. This to have and to hold from this day forward comes from this time. That is a new addition to the marriage ceremony at that time. So it's not just about basic have babies, work hard. There's also the love put back into it, because it's hard to be a partner with someone you hate. It just really comes down to that. So how do you commemorate such a marriage? So if the marriage is about the women crossing from childhood into adulthood, then how do you commemorate that kind of thing? So what is a part of the contract? So this is a really quite fancy example. It's called the Barovia Cup, and it's made by Angelo Barovia. And this was part of an extensive negotiation. So the marriage contract is not just this guy's going to get married to this woman and she costs this amount of money, otherwise known as a dowry. It's also about the ceremony of the time. So big noble families like Barovia would have these big days-long ceremonies. The dowry is not just money, it's her whole trousseau, her whole outfit, the nightgowns, the jewelry, all of this, fancy, beautiful things. That's a demonstrative example of this is how much we love each other. And at the time of a big, long, days-long, really days-long marriage ceremony, other people would also take advantage of it and get married too. So they would it's this kind of outpouring of gestures and loves. So while the woman's family puts forward a dowry, the man's family also gives gifts, and that's one of the Barovia cups, is to commemorate the occasion. So there's quite some serious differences between marriage ceremonies. It depends, really. And I always think, do you want a big giant ceremony where you have to invite 250 people, or do you want something quite informal? And it really did depend. Lower socioeconomic classes would have informal ceremonies. In the 14th, 15th century, you'd go off for a little while and come back and set up your house, which was quite cool. You'd have coercive marriage in some of those matrilineal tribes, where you'd have warfare between the Comanche tribes, for example, in the plains of America, and they would go and raid, bring back women to replace the ones they lost. So it does just depend on the place you live, your place in society. But what's promised is quite diverse. So the ceremonies diverse, what's promised likewise diverse. But there is some common ground. You're promised your transfer into adulthood. You're promised that permanency. You know, there's no longer instability in your life. You don't know what might happen. You know what's going to happen. You have this partnership of marriage that's going to be setting up your life forever. So women might not be able to own land, but through their marriage, they'd have a dowry of stuff they own that's theirs. Likewise, since divorce is going to threaten the stability of society, you have the security of life in this comfort. But likewise, there are grounds for divorce. And one of the grounds for divorce is if you're not satisfied in any of those things that you're supposed to be provided, if there's not security in your life, the man or the woman is not stable, is going off and doing things that divide the family, getting drunk, being insane, things that are damaging, and then not providing comfort, which even in Puritan America, you could divorce your husband, ladies, if he was not providing you with sufficient satisfaction in all things. Likewise, for men, if the woman is not providing children, you could divorce her in some places, or at least put her away and have other groups. So it's about this. It's not just about ownership marriage. It's not just about that. There's also an element of the things we understand about marriage, which is that it's not just about kids. So that's the thing to take away. What would you prefer? What would you have wanted? If you had all these at your disposal, all these things, all this, you had the love tokens, you had the dress, you had the outfits, you had the experience of both courtly and romantic love. Which one sounds better? And when you start thinking that way, instead of thinking about these historical figures as paintings on a page, you think of them as your friends, your people, which they were, our people. Hopefully that was in time.
Thank you so much, Melanie. There's a lot to take in there, very interesting. And also that some of the aspects you talked about actually still occur now, which is quite interesting. We've got some time for some questions now. Some people have pre-submitted some questions, but if you want to put any questions in the chat for live now, please do so. And we will try to answer as many as we can. Also, I've put in the email address. So if we don't get through to any questions, or you have any questions later, then you can email us. And also the webinar is recorded and you'll get that tomorrow. So just to say that as well. And one of the pre-submitted questions was about, can you do history with another subject? Clara, did you want to perhaps say something about that?
Yeah, so I personally did just single honours history, but there were loads of people on my course that did history with history of art, for example. I don't know whether there's any restrictions on what courses you can combine, but you definitely can do double honours.
There are a few restrictions. It depends on if it's built together to work together. For example, history and law has some very strict rules, but there are some restrictions, but they usually can be worked around because there's a pre-existing structure, framework that they've been built to do together. So usually you can find these, you can ask your admissions people, they usually know, but likewise it's history of arts, history and journalism, history, any of the modern languages. History in Japanese is a quite popular one. History in modern languages quite popular as well. History and law, but there are some very specific rules there because that's two different degrees. You know, the law degree is LLB and LL.
LLB,
yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
different degree you end up with. So the connection is different. The puzzle pieces have to be kind of forced in some ways.
Yeah.
So definitely just ask and we'll know is kind of the answer to that.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Melanie. And also we had a pre-question about industry. Is with a history degree, is there any opportunity to sort of go and do placements or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think that you can do a whole placement year, but I know like a lot of people as well did just one module, which was a placement module. So one of my friends worked at the Natural History Museum in Oxford doing that, friends that worked in libraries, other museums. I think the Ashmolean sometimes takes people. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities if that's something that you're interested in.
That's great. And also, Clara, what's the city like here?
I really loved Oxford as a city. It was actually one of the reasons why I looked at Brookes in the first place, because obviously the University of Oxford is such an old university. It's really student-based town, so there's like loads of restaurants, there's loads of like clubs, there's loads of other stuff to do. Like there's a place called Junkyard Golf, which was really great. There's escape rooms, so whether you like drinking or not, there's loads of stuff to do, and it's really based around young people, and there's student discounts everywhere. And yeah, it's a really great city. And then obviously as a history student, there's really great history in Oxford as well. So yeah, definitely really love the city.
Thank you. And Melanie, what do you look for in a student who wants to study this course?
Passion. Personally, passion. I like just passion about anything really. Desire. I'm a historian of tolerance by trade. I forgot to introduce myself with my research interests. I just realized that halfway through speaking. That is what I do is tolerance and racial relations, political history, theory. So the care that I take in history is really wanting to understand, always seeking to find out. And that's why with going to uni at all, really, it doesn't matter for the history degree per se, is that there's that desire, there's that passion to say, well, I'd really like to do this, or I really like to have, so it's the passion for something. It doesn't have to be the passion to, you know, what did one of the interviews, it was it's been a while. The only interview I went in for a long time, and she wanted fashion design, and she was going to do history because she wanted to know the history of fashion. So she was just really quite keen on Topshop, and but didn't think she spoke. That's what she spoke on was top. It was all this wonderful passion, just to, you know, and that it's not knowledge, it's not study, it's not I read 18 books last weekend. That's definitely not the point of uni. The point is that you're a seeker, a wanter. That's the key. Hopefully that right, Clara? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
Expressive.
I think when I was writing my personal statement,
not that there's anything wrong with Topshop.
Yeah, when I was writing my personal statement to apply for my master's, the careers people really emphasized that as well. They were like, just tell them, like, you've come in here and you said you want to do it because you love history, so tell them that.
That's great, thank you. And this is to both of you, maybe Clara first. How is the course examined?
So there's been a shift, I think it's in the whole university, but definitely in the history department, away from exams. So I only had one exam, I think, at my whole time at Brookes. I had the rest.
And that's for your undergrad?
Yeah, for my undergrad. There's no exams at master's level. So we did some presentations, group work, some individual presentations, mostly essays, I would say. very strongly weighted towards essays. And then there was also some where we had like a weekly participation thing where you had to do a little contribution every week. It was usually about a minute or a minute and a half where you talk about something, and then that would contribute to your grade as well. So it's quite a variety of assessments, but not really exams anymore.
Okay, Melanie, did you want to add on that at all?
There is the university-wide rule. There is no exams first semester, first year. There's no, we try not to have exams in any course in the first semester of any year. But there's a rule now, unless it's for, there's different, there's a, business has a lot of these. Business has exams the first semester, the first year, because it's for a contract, it's for a specific kind of job you're doing. But most of the history modules are what's called 100% coursework. So you'll have a participation element of some stripe. So that's a variety of things. For example, I do Google Forms where you just type in answers to some questions that are related to the readings that we've designed. People have portfolios that are due at the end of term that are basically the paragraph you wrote about a resource you were supposed to look at, a reading you were supposed to do. It's preparation for the course, which is the argument. So it's not necessarily about is it right? It's about were you there? Were you ready for the class today? So it's that kind of thing. That's what the participation is more about, rather than just being something that you have to do. It's something that helps you prepare. Then there's usually a middle assessment, which depends on which course it is. Primary source assessments are quite common, where you go find something like that John Donne poem, like that painting of the Arnolfi family, and write some words on it, assessing it as part of the types of history that you do. So why is it useful? What does it show? How is this related to an overarching historical context? Have other historians talked about it? That kind of thing. And then there's always in 100% coursework, there is a final assessment, which can be a report all the way up to a formal essay. Formal essays are research, sort of like the research questions you do at A levels.
Thank you. And how many students are typically on the course? Maybe Clara answer that, and then Melanie.
It depends on the module, I'd say. Like especially when I got to third year, because there was more choice of modules, it was a lot smaller. So I think there was like 10 usually in each group, but then there could be a lot bigger, like some of the core modules, obviously everyone had to take them, so they were a lot bigger, but I think there's still only about 100. I might be wrong there though.
When you mean core, do you mean compulsory? Or
yeah, the compulsory modules.
Okay, yeah. And how many compulsory modules are you doing in your first year? Do you remember? Or Melanie can answer that, sorry.
Melanie might not be able to answer that.
Okay.
I think they've changed it since I was in first year, because when I was in first year it was 100% compulsory modules, but I think they've changed that.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I'm just checking that.
It exists on the course. So if you go look on the courses, so history of art, criminology. So if you go look at those courses, the description on the website, it'll say.
Yeah.
It has a breakdown. So I don't know offhand because melty brain, end of the day. But I know that there's a skills course every semester, really. There's a skills course that you'll have to take. So in history, it's making history, which is the first skills course. And then in your second year, it's historical writing and sources and documents. And then in your third year, of course, it's a dissertation. So that's compulsory. So there's a skills thing for every term. And then there'll be a slate of optional modules you can take. And it ranges. Our cohorts range from 100 to 160, I think was the largest I ever taught. And you'd only ever see all those other 160 people when you're in a lecture hall together with them. In your seminar sets, it usually is, as Clara said, it's usually between 10, max 18 is the most we've ever put in a set together. Most I've ever taught is 18 in a set in person, because the Zoom experience has changed our lives so dramatically. But the live sessions are usually held with 18 maximum. So that puts you in us in enough connections that you have one-to-one contact.
Great, thank you.
We'll look see what the current cohort in history is. I think I can't remember.
Yeah, and I think Melanie made a really interesting point of actually going to look at the modules and seeing, you can see the breakdown and if they're compulsory. So that's quite a good point to have a look at if you have time. Go onto our website. We've nearly come to the end. Thank you so much, Clara and Melanie. It's been really worthwhile and really useful tonight. So thank you very much. I'm just gonna go through a few things. We've come to the end, so thank you very much for attending this evening. As I said earlier, you will get a recorded of this webinar, and you should get that tomorrow. And I have put in an email address in the chat, so if you have any other questions or any issues, please do emails. Before I say goodbye though, there's those who are joining us from outside Oxfordshire today. If you have not already heard about our National Discover Brooks Access Programme, there's still time to apply. Discover Brooks is an 18-month programme which supports you in making decisions about your future educational choices. You'll get to take part in a series of exciting subjects, sessions, explore your future, career opportunities, and access information and advice about how to progress to higher education and develop useful transferable skills. From the start of the programme, you'll be paired up with a current Oxford Brookes student who is studying the subject related to you, like we've had Clara this evening. The deadline is the 7th of February. So if you want to put an application in, I'll just quickly put in the details in the chat, and so you can have a look. We hope to see you soon and for any of our other activities. And if you do have any questions, please do use the email address that I put in earlier. And thanks very much for attending, and I hope it was useful. Please do look on our website if there's any other things you'd like to know. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much.